Hello and welcome to the 8th session of the Mayamiko Introduction to Natural Dyeing course. And this session is all about problem solving. What happens when something goes wrong? Now, of course, we all hope that nothing will go wrong, but mistakes happen, nature changes, and it's going to happen. So, firstly, let's look at some of the common problems that you might encounter when you start on your voyage into natural dyeing. So these are mistakes that I have made myself personally, that I've learnt from. And one of the biggest frustrations is when the fabric hasn't dyed evenly, which means that some areas are lighter or darker than other areas and they form visible patches. This is very challenging, and often, as you can see in this image, a number of us will stand staring at a piece of fabric for a very long time to try and figure out if it is a patch or if it's not a patch, or is it passable, is it acceptable, or do we need to use that fabric for something else? So I think it always helps to kind of set your expectation. So you are dyeing with plants and food waste in a small scale environment. It is very challenging to get fabric really evenly dyed, and you will always continue to get better at this every time you do it. But it's good to set good expectations of, and not be too tough or hard on yourself, and work within a flexible time frame and flexible expectation. So sometimes the fabric comes out the dye with marks or spots of a darker colour. This can sometimes be a mystery, or sometimes it can be that a plant or an insect or some kind of animal has made its way into the bucket. Thirdly, the colour of the fabric is different to previous samples and not what was expected. So if you're using plants or food waste, one set of leaves might come from a different tree to another set of leaves, or might be slightly older or slightly drier than the other set of leaves. There is going to be variation, and that's part of becoming familiar with that. Expect that there will be changes between colours, and the way that we solve that problem is by having a spectrum for each colour that we deem as acceptable. And it's about reframing your mind to think that it's not going to be, each piece of fabric is not going to be exactly the same. There will be variations. And then the dye plants aren't releasing enough colour. So we have this problem a lot with avocado stones. Sometimes you'll get this incredible pink, other times not so great. And again, this might come down to the variety of the avocado stone, or the age of the avocado stone. So many variables. The wrong piece of fabric was dyed a certain colour. So when you're starting to do bigger orders and you've got different pieces of fabric which are destined for different dye pots and different colours, it can all get very confusing and overwhelming as to which fabric is to go in each place. And so really this comes back to being super organised, of making sure that you keep your lists, that as a team everybody's on the same page, and these mistakes will happen. The colour changed after washing the dyed fabric with washing powder. So I certainly know that there are certain colours, for example in Sri Lanka, turmeric root, which is really affected by washing powder and will go from a yellow to an orange. And then, for example, avocado stones are positively affected by soda ash, and they will go from a light pink to a darker pink. And so working with your produce in Malawi might be that we discover some more colours which are affected by different, mordants or washing powders that we use throughout the process. And they can also have really positive effects as well as challenges or negatives. So one of the best ways to become more confident at dyeing and to find confidence in problem solving is through sampling and experimentation. Practice is really important, and the more you become familiar with the process and the variations of colour, and the more confident you'll become in solving the problems. The best way to problem solve and continue to improve is by making note of what went wrong. So almost keep like a natural dyeing journal. Make sure you communicate the problems and solutions to the whole team so they can learn with you. We all have different strengths, and sometimes it really helps getting a second opinion, you know? And also it really helps to accept that in the beginning there will be problems and see those problems as a positive, because it'll be an indication that you're moving towards a recipe that works for you and your environment. Don't do too much at once. Focus on achieving 1 or 2 colours whilst you learn the process. And so at Mayamiko, we're going to start by doing a sampling process, and that will really help you become familiar with, the outcomes that we can expect. And so there's a few things which I have found are really basic and make total sense, but are really key in, influencing and impacting the outcome of your fabric quite largely. And one of them is keeping equipment clean and tidy, making sure that you use different cloths and sponges for washing dye equipment and cooking equipment. Often like cross-contamination of dyes on a cleaning sponge can cause havoc. And the big buckets and pots that we're using for dyeing are often quite challenging to wash because they're just big. And so it's about finding a technique and a system which ensures that, all of those equipment are washed and there's a good way of knowing what's clean and what's dirty. One thing that we've really learned is about using specific buckets for each colour. So for example, a yellow bucket or a pink and red bucket. And then especially if you're using like a fermented vat or an iron vat or one with strong colours, make sure that you don't use that for anything else and use dedicated utensils and pots for those buckets as well. We would find that when we were using turmeric, which is the yellow colour, which is a really, really strong colour, even if we cleaned the bucket quite well, there would be a small little amount left in one of the buckets and it would just ruin a piece of fabric. So it's really about being really conscientious around cleaning and maintaining your workspace. And then storing the fabrics in a clean, dry and safe environment, only bringing them into the dye room when they are ready to be dyed. Yeah, because there's lots of opportunity for splashing, for mess, for dirt, and so keep everything in a safe place until the last moment. And then stay organised. Label things. Label pots, utensils and buckets so that everyone knows what they can be used for and what they can't be used for. And make sure you brief your team. Make sure everybody knows the way of the dye room, that they know they can't make, these easy mistakes to make, especially if somebody's new and not familiar with the process. Always put lids on buckets and pots. If one insect gets into a bucket, it can mark a piece of fabric. And make sure that you wash the fabric really, really thoroughly after the soda ash and washing powder stage. Because if the soda ash or washing powder isn't fully out of the fabric, then that can create patching on the fabric or marks on the fabric. We found that to be very true. And with certain colours, that shows up more than others. So one thing that we do at Amma is make it easy for ourselves. We stick visual aids on the walls to remind ourselves of the process. When you have multiple pots boiling at once and different buckets of dyes, it can get confusing. So make sure that you, make it really easy and clear for yourself. Keep a table of the final recipes and quantities on the wall so you can refer to them when needed. So our table is on the left. It's really simple, really basic. It involves a swatch of the fabric for the colour, a picture of the product, the name of the plant in both English and Tamil, the language spoken, and then the quantities, how long to leave it for, everything you need to know in a really concise way. And once we've developed the recipes for Mayamiko, once we've done the sampling and we've worked out the quantities, then we can really simply form a table like this. And then if we look at this other image on the right-hand side here, you can also see that this is the dyeing process in images. So a really straightforward process that people can just look at and figure out where they are at the stages of the process. So sometimes it just feels totally out of control, and nature is always changing. We as humans are always changing, and it's a beautiful part of life. So sometimes the problems we encounter will be outside of our control, and that's a challenge. So what do we do when we have an order and we need to dye a certain colour and it's just not working? Well, I think these 5 steps have really helped me. So firstly, don't panic. When we act out of panic or urgency, we often don't solve the problem in its most efficient way. So take a deep breath and slow down. I found lots of issues originally. I would do crazy things, like I wanted to get a green colour once and I went and scraped moss off a wall and tried to make it into a dye when I was panicking. It was silly. And then identify the problem. So where does the problem lie? Is it the water, the dye plants, the mordant, the fabric, the weather, fabric patches? Really zoom in on where that problem is, so that you know which part of the process to solve. Then always get a second opinion. When you're looking at something really closely, it's often good to have a much wider perspective to bring light to our blind spots. What are we missing? So bring in a friend or a teammate to help input and help solve the problem. And then think about what action we can take. So how are we going to solve this problem? Do we have to rewrite and rethink the time frame or create a new plan? Be really practical and then make that change. Take the first step in fixing the problem. And sometimes that might be apologizing to a customer and saying, I'm really sorry, but these things have happened and it's out of our control. We need an extra few days to correct this. And usually I've found that people understand and are gracious. And I just wanted to tell you this final story about an order we had in Sri Lanka where we were using pomegranate skins to dye these pouches green. And then one night, literally overnight, the colour shifted from green to a bright yellow and I had no idea what it was. And so I was panicking and trying to figure out the problem. I was buying lots of new products. I was finding lots of different new sources and getting really exhausted trying to correct this because I felt under so much pressure. And then in the end, I phoned my mum and I said to her, Mum, I don't know what's happened, but the colour has gone from green to yellow and I don't know what to do. And she said, well, have the farmers outside, the farmers growing the vegetables, have they done anything to the land? And I looked out the window and the farmers had put loads of white lime onto the ground to prepare the land for growing vegetables. And that lime had gone into the water stream and had shifted the pH of the water and changed the colour. It had taken the iron levels out of the water, which meant the colour shifted back to yellow from green. That was totally outside of my control. In the end, I solved it by finding a different water source. So instead of using the mains water, I started to use a well source of water, which was deeper and which wasn't affected, and that gave me the green. So there is always a way to solve the problem. Let me encourage you that. So don't ever panic. There's always a solution. Thanks. Bye.